But of course, this discussion isn't only about numbers. It's also about culture and identity. It was Margaret Thatcher back in 1978 who spoke of some British people's fears that they might be rather swamped by people of a different culture. And in many towns and cities, that remains a concern today. On the other hand, who would staff the hospitals, the trains, the buses? Who would open the corner shops if we did crack down on immigration? Are there economic benefits that outweigh the potential social costs? Well, our panellists tonight are Trevor Phillips, the head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, David Frost, the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Srila Flather, Baroness Flather, who was the first Asian woman to receive a peerage, and Douglas Murray, Director of the think tank, the Centre for Social Cohesion. Now, I'm going to ask each of you to make an opening statement of no more than 2 to 3 minutes. We'll then hear from our invited audience. Thank you very much. Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was reading just this morning, again, a great favourite piece of mine by the American journalist and writer Tom Wolfe, famous piece, Radical Chic, he wrote in the late 60s, about a party at the house of Leonard Bernstein and his wife for the Black Panther leaders. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. But one of the interesting things that stood out to me again was this moment when Bernstein himself is questioning this Black Panther leader, and he says to him, but what happens, sir, when you've pulled down the whole state, when you've sort of destroyed the economic capitalist system and so on? He says you can't put a blueprint on the future. Bernstein says, you mean you're just going to wing it? Well, immigration policy in recent decades in Britain has been exactly that. And it's quite a striking thing to wing, because it's not only an economic question. Quite often you hear the debate about migration, immigration, solely spoken about in economic terms. But it's about far more than that. It's about identity. It's about people feeling they have a home. It's about not being limitlessly open to immigration from around the world. If you're a first world country these days, of course, you're a desirable destination for almost anybody in the world. You have to have, obviously, some limits. Now, Trevor Phillips said, among the questions that come up are, well, who would do the jobs? Well, we have 2.5 million people unemployed in this country. There are plenty of people who could do the jobs. John Prescott recently got that extraordinary answer from a young woman he interviewed who said, no, I'm not working class, I ain't never worked. We have, and we should face up to it. An underclass that has never worked doesn't know that it ought to work. We have to do something to get these people back into society. And a second fallacy, quickly, is the idea that we have to keep on importing a working class because people are getting old. Well, I hate to break it to you, but migrants become old people too. And if you are going to keep on bringing in larger and larger numbers of people to provide that workforce, that aging population, it will be limitless. Very briefly, one of my favourite current thinkers, a great German Muslim thinker called Bassam Tibi, a few years ago came up with this concept he described as the Leitkultur, a core culture. The importance in any country, any nation that's going to bind together, of having a core culture around which all sorts of variations are possible, almost limitless variations, but that they are only possible if people know what the theme is. And if there is a problem in Britain today, it is that the British people sense, of all backgrounds, they sense that Britain has lost its theme. If we do not have a unifying theme, I very much worry about the same things that Trevor Phillips mentioned at the beginning. He said that the British people are remarkably tolerant. I agree. But that tolerance will not be boundless.
Then we need to. And if I may just make a point, coming back on what Douglas said. Look, we've always been pretty good at this. Right from the very first Elizabeth, where there were all sorts of issues about Catholics coming into the country, she said, I will not make a window into the hearts and souls of men. Essentially, as long as you play by the rules, then everybody's welcome here, everybody contributes. And that's really been the way that we've always dealt with it, and that's why we are better at it than any other country, I would say, by the way, in the world.
It is rising. And, if he will say, I'm now being an extremist, but half of the children born in 2009 were born to mothers born abroad.
But the fact is we are still below replacement level, which is 2.4. Our birth rate is something like 1.9 per woman. We're still a declining population.
Let me just ask Douglas Murray one question, then I'm going to come to the audience. Douglas, you talked about the need for a unifying theme in any cohesive society. Is it your contention that immigrants somehow dilute that unifying theme?
Well, absolutely, and particularly when you see not just immigration, but mass immigration, which is what this country has seen since.
And you
the
talk
last
about
war.
mass immigration, even having looked at the figures or heard the figures, which I
This is mass
outlined.
immigration. Hundreds of thousands of people going into a country any year, of course, is by any standards mass immigration. And may I say, just quickly, this figure that's always trotted out about the Huguenots and Elizabeth I. The same number of Huguenots came to this country over a half-century as people come into this country in a couple of months now. Now, it's true that there is a level at which people can integrate swiftly and that society can absorb them. But I would contend, and I think there's a lot of evidence to say this, that if hundreds of thousands of people are coming in, there is no incentive to involve yourself in the society. That is why we see the situation we currently have with parallel communities. I mean, if you don't even have to leave London to see this, that there are communities in this country that are to all intents and purposes, transplanted direct. And I think that's a bad thing.
OK, Douglas Murray, can I get you to respond to the second question, which is why you think there is concern about immigration levels? Is it more to do with economic concerns, fears about jobs and so on, or is it really fear engendered by media coverage of the issue?
No, I think it's too easy to pretend these issues aren't actually there, pretend that the media whips them up and so on. Let's say, take a recent celebrity in this matter, Mrs. Duffy. From Rochdale, who became famous when she spoke with Prime Minister Gordon Brown ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown before the last election. Mrs. Duffy mentioned that her sons and grandchildren couldn't get jobs because of migrants coming into the area. Now, I would say that's not the interesting thing. What is interesting was that the trigger response to that from somebody who should know better was to label that woman a bigot. In that, you see the problem, which is that people in this country are aware of what immigration has brought. They notice the advantages they've got from immigration, but they also notice that there are downsides. But the moment they mention any of those downsides, the political class, anyone else, squashes down them and says, if you were even to raise that, you'd be a bigot. This is the problem. Now, I think that finally there's a very...
He didn't get re-elected.
Trevor Phillips.
Yeah, I don't think Gordon Brown... I think he didn't get re-elected for wrecking our economy till the end of time. I mean, I don't think it was directly the Mrs. Duffy case, but...
Do you acknowledge, though, Douglas Murray, that there has been a shift over the last maybe 12 months or so in the preparedness of leading politicians now to start tackling this issue?
No, because I think that the politicians are in a terrible mess over this one. Because they think the moment you sense it with them, whenever you discuss this matter, in private or in public with politicians of any party, they behave as though they are treading on eggshells. Because to a very great extent, their whole political careers, magnificent political careers, could be wrecked in a second if they got this one wrong. The fact is that people need to have their concerns reflected by the political class, and they don't. Let me give you one very quick example, if I may, which was that in April of this year, just before the election, the Labour government boasted of the number of jobs it had created in its 13-year period in office. And it turned that almost every one of the 1.67 million new jobs had gone to foreign-born workers. Now, if you were a British person who had not been born abroad, you should have the ability to discuss that in a way that does not bring your political class and often sections of your media class down on your head. These are utterly legitimate concerns.
Let's take another couple of questions. Gentleman over there.
Christian Story, King's College. First of all, I'd like to say that I couldn't agree with Douglas Murray more. My concern is regarding immigrants that don't integrate into the larger community. And therefore there's not as such a melting pot of immigration, but a volatile salad bowl, if you like. Our tolerance and liberalism is being exploited in certain places like Bradford, my city, to such an extent that the city is on the verge or knife edge of social and economic collapse. And this is partly because of the issue of the city rulers and the councillors and the police are not willing to deal with the issue for fear of being labelled racists. So my question would be, what do you think the future is for cities like Bradford?
Trevor Phillips, very simple question for you. What is the future for Bradford?
Bradford is a pretty successful city. Bradford's got a new city centre. I know there are issues, but there are issues in every city. And by the way, some of those issues in London are not brown or black, they're white. You stand outside the pub on Friday night or Saturday night in any city, and you're going to find some difficulties. I do not think Bradford's a city on the verge of collapse, actually. I think financial services and so on there have changed it. Can I just make a very quick point about something else? Let's just stop having this debate as though we're still in the 1980s. Immigration is now an irreversible part of the world economy. The remittances business, people sending money back home, $450 billion every year, more than all of the flows of official aid. This is part of the new world we've just got to deal with. And here, I don't agree, Douglas. I mean, I don't know what world you're living in. Nobody can stop talking about immigration at the moment. There's not some dirty secret. Actually, what's happened is it isn't carrying the same charge that it used to when Enoch Powell made it into a purely racial debate. It is a question about economics, about social costs, about how we plan. So trying to recast this as though we were still having the same debate about race that we did in the 1970s, frankly, is a complete waste of time. It's a new world. Let's talk about it in that context.
Douglas Murray. Trevor, I mean, this exactly demonstrates the problem, doesn't it? I mean, there's a gentleman there who lives in Bradford and says that he experiences it as a very riven and torn society. You know, you, on a very substantial government salary in your large quango, get to
I was wondering when we were going to get to my salary.
Get to swan in, and you'll be welcomed by all of the relevant faith leaders and all the sort of self-important people in the community who say they speak for the community and so on. And that's your experience of Britain. When you say, which world do I live in? I live in the ordinary world of other people in Britain. But, I mean, if I can say so, yours is a very privileged view of this.
I think it's time for another question. There's a lady down here, and then there's a gentleman right at the back there. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Sue Wright, University of Portsmouth. I wanted to ask the panel what they think about citizenship testing. What do they think it's for? Do they think it's working?
OK, thank you for that. And the gentleman at the back there?
My name is Bruno Silva. I'm from Brunel University. I just wanted to pick up on Mr. Murray's points about the British culture and when the immigrants are coming in, they're not really getting a sense of what it's supposed to be like to be British. It's a culture which is always evolving. That's what makes the British culture such a good thing. At the same time, that's what people kind of see it as a negative.
OK, thanks for that. Douglas Murray, citizenship testing?
I think it's vital. It may be too late, but it's certainly something we should be doing pretty rigorously now. I mean, what the young gentleman just said gets very much to the core of the problem, because the British people are, I would submit, stuck between the following sort of statements. On the one hand, you have yourself saying, there's no such thing as British culture. And a lot of people feel that. A lot of people that feel that British identity.
Well, to be fair, that's not exactly what he said. He said it's evolving all the time.
Sure, but that it's been so assailed that there's no such thing as British culture, as it were. That's the beauty of it. And then on the other hand, you have Trevor Phillips coming along and saying, if you have any of those old-fashioned concerns, you've just got to get with the modern beat about it. You're so last century, and so on. Actually, I don't think that is the case. I don't think it is an economic debate. I think it's one about identity, which people should be having. I agree, by the way, about this thing about having the debate on it. I mean, it's incredibly tedious when politicians say, let's have a debate. Think, no, you're meant to make decisions after a debate's happened outside society and so on. But there is a need in this country to tell people what they are immigrating into. And and I agree with part of your point. I mean, we have been very, very bad in Britain in recent years of saying what we are. And if you don't know what you're immigrating into, how on earth can you become part of that society? And especially when there's then a whole chorus of people saying it doesn't matter whether you're part of society. Whatever you want, whichever tune you want to play, whatever variation, however crazy, even if you bring, I hate to say Baroness Flathers behind the times on this one, there are indeed cases of men who brought 4 wives into this country and have them on benefits. This is a great example. If you're a Scottish man who wants to commit bigamy, you'll be sent into jail. But if you're a man who's just immigrated into the country and you've got 4 wives, they'll all be paid for. Now, it doesn't take much to recognise that that's not a great way to go on. That's not a great way to go on if you want a cohesive society.
Lady Frost, I'll come to you in 1 second. But Trevor Phillips was desperate to come in a moment ago, so I'll come to you in a second. Yeah, Trevor.
Look, I'm not going to be cast as the guy here who's in favour of laissez-faire, multicultural. I'm the person that there are people who still won't speak to me for saying that I thought that we need to drop the whole state multiculturalism idea. I think the fundamental point, first of all, immigrants in this country, if you survey them, are the most hawkish about people learning English because they know how important it is. So nobody has, I don't have to apologise for that. Secondly, on the issue of British identity, I do agree, actually. I mean, here's, unfortunately, something that Douglas and I agree about. I think it's incredibly important. I think it's something we've got to debate about. And the reason is this. If you talk to immigrants, and I've been to some of the citizenship ceremonies, which I have found incredibly moving, these are people who have chosen Britishness. Why do they choose Britishness? Well, one reason is because being British is not an ethnic identity, as many identities across the world is. It is an identity that you can put on if you sign up to certain values and behaviours. And one of them, for example, the surveys show that if you ask people, what's the best symbol of being British? They will tell you it's a queue. Because why? Everybody's equal in a queue, and it has a tradition of civility that's important to our country. So all these things are tremendously important.
Hang on, Douglas Murray?
Okay. Can I please ask, is there another group of people in the world of whom who would select in a country and say, you know what, you don't actually have an identity. You're not a people. You're not a recognisable people. You never were. Is there any other group that enjoys this?
Nobody
is Britain.
Nobody has said that
identity?
about the British people. Are you saying
there is no identity other than possibly
all right, Douglas, you've had your point.
I haven't said that that's true about the British people. I said exactly the opposite. All I said is that our identity is not ethnic, but it is civil. I think it's stronger for that because we choose it.